Introducing Zach Davis and Josh Anderson with the Sound Money Podcast.
Hello, welcome, Zach, to the Sound Money, Sound Principles, the Believers Podcast. My name is Josh Anderson alongside Zach Davis for another episode of the Sound Money, Sound Principles Podcast. How you doing today, Zach?
Good, Josh. How are you doing?
Man, I am awesome. It's a beautiful day and a beautiful opportunity to get together and share with the believers all across the country a little bit about a topic that I just think that very few people understand. And understanding this topic really can make all the difference for people. It's amazing to me how often this is one of the most vital things that a person can understand in order to be a successful entrepreneur, in order to be a successful, what I would call prognosticator of the future of business and of economies. But it is a topic that is understood by the least amount of smart people in the world. And so today, Zach, we want to talk about inflation. We want to talk about the very thing that's killing the U.S. economy and the worldwide economy today. This what I would consider to be this term, inflation, that everybody knows what it is, but nobody knows what it is. That'd be a fair statement?
Yeah, 100%. I think everybody in concept knows what it is because they fill it at the grocery store at the fuel pump, right? But they don't know where it comes from, and they don't know what it's really doing to their wealth.
And by the way, it is the absolute killer of innovation. It's the killer of our economies in the world today, and it's the killer of the middle class. Inflation is killing the middle class of the world. And so we want to take a minute today and we want to share with listeners just an education overview of what is inflation, how does it work, what creates it, what makes it grow, what makes it shrink. Understanding what makes it grow and shrink can help an individual and or a business owner make real life decisions that make all the difference for them. And so I want to jump in, Zach. It'd probably be easiest today, right? Like what is inflation? What controls it? And I think it'd be kind of fun, right? Like one of the most crazy things just happened with one of the most powerful, influential men in government today overseeing the economy. He recently had an interview. Of course, some of you may have seen this. For many of you, it'll be the first time that might put a little fear in you, and that's not our intent, right? Our intent's not to put fear in you, but our intent is for you to understand a little bit better that maybe people that are supposed to understand this problem about inflation, that maybe they're as clueless as the average American. So Zach, tell us a little bit about this video clip that we're going to start out with today.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. And by the way, if any of you listeners listened to our previous podcast where we had Roger Ball on, we talked about this idea of knowledge, right? And that knowledge will save you. So again, this isn't like a scare thing where we're like trying to freak everybody out, but you have to understand a few things that are going on in the world in order to protect yourself. And most people don't understand what's going on. And this is what's insane to me. I'm going to show you this video. Okay. Now, so there is really no way to fact check or proof these things. So when I first saw this, I thought it was like satire. I thought it was like a spoof. But I'm seeing it more and more now, and there's some people out there saying, no, this is real. This was a real interview. So just a little disclaimer here. This could be satire, okay? As far as I know, and as far as I've been able to see, this interview really happened. And whether it did or didn't happen, I think the point is still the same. and it really doesn't matter if it's real or not. But I think it's real.
And to point, Zach, right? Like, we've done our fact checking, right? We've checked the video out. We've ran it through the chains. And when government officials through their Twitter accounts, when Elon Musk through his Twitter account shares the video and labels it as real, like that's as good as we can get in the world, right? For us.
Yes.
So,
yeah. So let me just share this video with you, and then I think we ought to just talk about this a little bit, Josh. So let's see, share this for our viewers here. So I'm going to share this.
And who is this individual that we're going to
So this is Jared Bernstein. He is the leading economic advisor to President Biden. Now, look, again, this is not political. This is no way to be like taking sides. My philosophy is whether you're red or blue, it's different wings of the same bird. So this is just what's going on right now, right? So let me, okay, here we go.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why don't we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds. Right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least in my year with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to I guess I can't really talk. And I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
Wow. There's nothing confusing there, but he couldn't make sense of it, Zach.
It's insane. Like, so here's a couple things out of this video that I was shocked when I listened to, right? Is number one, I don't know. I watched this whole documentary. I don't know who the lady is that came on in the beginning, and I don't know who the interviewer was. But so there's two things that I think are really, really shocking here that should just scare the crap out of everybody that's listening to this podcast. Is number one, the chairman of the council for the leading economic advisors of the current presidential administration cannot explain where our currency comes from and where it goes and how it gets repaid. That's scary, okay?
Really scary.
The second thing that I think is really shocking about this is the gal in the beginning introduces this by basically asking the question if the country can go bankrupt, right? And then Jared says, well, no, we can't go bankrupt because we print our own money. Like, we can just keep printing. Well, she says, I'm waiting for someone to stand up and explain to me why we are having to repay money that we print ourselves in our own currency. This, I think, is a fundamental problem of most of the people in the United States of America today, and probably in a lot of other countries, is the fact that the guy who's leading the way in the economic recovery that we're supposedly having doesn't know where money comes from, and this lady who's asking the question doesn't know where money comes from. Like, it would be interesting to do a poll and find out how many of our listeners would say that the government prints money. Josh, does the United States government print money?
Absolutely not. They do not have the authority nor the ability to do it, and they do not do it. Zach, and it depends how old your bills are, right? If you have bills in your wallet, right? It's really interesting how this works, because up until recently, right? So new bills will say, this is a Federal Reserve note up in the upper right-hand corner. It used to say it across the top in really bold print. And it used to say, it didn't have this, the United States of America, but it's a Federal Reserve note, right? We make this assumption, like, I know for me, for years and years, I made this assumption, well, yes, the federal government makes this note, right? The Federal Reserve. That sounds official, like that's the government, right, Zach?
Yeah.
The problem is the Federal Reserve is just a name, right? In 1908, when a bunch of the wealthiest families in America, in a world, not even America, in the world, mostly Europe, got together to create the Federal Reserve, what it really is, it's a banking cartel, right? Like, it's a conglomerate of families who are in the banking space for the last 120 years, who got together and they wanted to create a national bank, but there was a nationalist movement in America at the time, and that had a negative connotation. Nationalism meant like fascism, and it meant it was akin to communism. So they said, well, we can't call it the national bank like they did in Europe, right? We're going to call it the Federal Reserve. It's just a company. It's a company. It's like you and I, entrepreneurs that said, you know what, we're going to control the banking sector. And they created what they call the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve is neither federal or a reserve, by the way. It's neither of those things. That's just a marketing ploy for those families to control it. And they produce the money, so they print the money. And Zach, who do they borrow the money to?
They borrow the money to the United States Treasury.
That's where it starts. They borrow the money. They print the bill, and then they borrow it to the Treasury. Now, the Treasury doesn't have money, so they go then out in the world and they create what's called bonds. Some of you maybe heard from your financial planner or people in your life that there are these things called bonds, right? Federal government issues bonds. What that really is an IOU to repay. Now, in the past, governments from around the world bought up the U.S. Treasury bonds, right? And we were even told things like by financial advisors forever, hey, make sure you put the safe portion of your money, like the money you can't lose, put it in Treasury bonds because that's the safest place. Now, of course, it's got the worst interest and it's tiny, right? But that's the safest place to put it. Well, that's because when the Federal Reserve creates that new dollar bill, it has to be purchased or borrowed by someone. They want their money, right? And so that's how the flow of money is created, right? And up until 1970 in the U.S. economy, you had to have gold to back it. But after 1970, after Richard Nixon changed that, you no longer had to have those notes be tied to gold in Fort Knox. And so that's what we're dealing with here. But to your point, when Biden's economist, right, who's supposed to know this stuff, says absolutely the government prints money. No, they don't. Absolutely, they do not print money. They do not have the ability. And how sad is that the highest ranking government officials in our country who are supposed to oversee the economy, Zach, don't understand that concept.
Yeah, and the very fact that he says, I don't really know how this works, right? And I don't know how it's repaid, ought to really give you a clue that's like, well, you don't know how it works because it doesn't work. You can't work it out in your mind to be like, okay, the government prints money and then it has to pay itself back. It stops right there. You're like, it's over. It doesn't work. It can't happen. And this is what I think is insane. We hear all these people say, well, we need to get our spending under control. We need to repay the debt. Look, here's the problem. Over 50% of the tax that we pay in America today goes just to service the interest on the debt that we borrow the money from the U.S. Treasury, right? So, Josh, if you come to me and you say, Zach, I have $0, okay, I have nothing. I'm the Federal Reserve. And you say, I want you to borrow me $100 million. I go, okay, great. I will print you in bills. This is a debt note, an IOU. I will print you $100 million. And then I say, oh, by the way, Josh, there's interest on that. So on that $100 million, you owe me $1 million in interest. I had to print the money to give you, right? And you had $0. Now you owe me $100 million plus $1 million in interest. Where are you going to get the interest to pay me what you owe me when you never had the money in the first place? I have to print the interest into existence to give you to pay me back. Yeah. So we're living in this utopian world where we think we can actually pay off the national debt and by controlling spending and more taxation. But in all reality, it is a never-ending loop, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And at some point, there is going to be a reckoning, right? I don't know where it is. I don't know what that will mean. But the government cannot pay its debt off because it had to borrow the dollar into existence in the first place. It has no money to even pay the interest. So,
and when that happens, Zach, this is I'm gonna boil down inflation to the simplest thing, right? I think that teachers in the world and leaders have to be able to explain things in simplistic manners. And here's where inflation increases. When you take and you print a new dollar, in this case, let's just go back in time to things like COVID, right? When we doubled the national debt during those periods, right? With the COVID relief bills. When we pass legislation like that, just to your point, that money has to go be created out of thin air. So the Federal Reserve, who's not federal, prints the money, then loans it to the U.S. government, and now it's gone to the money supply. Or like recently, we passed. This is the biggest farce that ever happened in America. Biden came out and couldn't get the Green New Deal done. Remember this, Zach?
Oh yeah.
He
2022.
Yeah, 2020 couldn't get the Green New Deal done. Him and AOC and the I'm sorry, I'll just be political. The freaking crazies in the left party. Okay, crazies. When they came out and tried to pass the Green New Deal, and then they wanted to increase it later. They want to change it, and they wanted to add more to it. They missed some things. Okay, so they wanted to add to it. They couldn't get it passed through the Senate. This is where you said, we have different colored wings but the same body, right? Some Republicans in the Senate held it up, and then they found a way to get them to agree to it by creating what they called the Inflation Reduction Act. Think about this for just a minute. We're going to reduce inflation, and we're going to get this flowery name. By the way, whoever's in Obama's Obama. See, I still think he's vice president. He's with Obama. Okay. Ridiculous.
Get your tinfoil hats on.
Get your hats on. It's coming out. Okay. But they get together, and somebody in that department needs to get a raise, because this is unbelievable marketing. This is great spin. The Inflation Reduction Act. And what did it actually do? It pumped a whole bunch more money in the system, like $8.8 billion just for green new energy, home efficiency programs. Okay. To give you an example, where is inside of we're going to reduce inflation, that we're going to add $8.8 billion of debt just for green energy at the home level? Do we not understand, by passing the Inflation Reduction Act, which pumps billions on billions and billions of dollars into this system where we're going to go print more money? What does that actually do? Every time you print a new dollar into existence, it takes the dollar that you hold in your wallet and it reduces its value. Why? Because if you create more of it, what you already have goes down in purchasing power. Okay? Meaning it costs more to buy the goods and services. So if you went to the grocery store, I was just with a guy yesterday. He was complaining to me just yesterday at lunch. He said, we went to lunch and he said, do you know that I used to come to this I used to be able to come here. Oh, sorry. It was 2 days ago. 2 days ago. He said, I used to be able to come to this restaurant and it cost $15 for lunch. There's nothing on the menu here less than $35 today. It's not magic, guys. It's things like COVID relief bill, Ukraine funding, and it's this Inflation Reduction Act money. When you print more money, the money that you print is worth more because the money you held now has less purchasing power. It's simple economics.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at today, Zach. We're printing more money, and every time we print it, inflation happens. It costs your dollar's worth less, so it costs more to buy a good or service.
Well, and I'm pretty simple-minded, and I like food. So I always this analogy works for me. I don't know if it works for anybody else, but I always think about money supply as like a chocolate cake. Right? If you walk into the room and there is 50 people in the room and there is one slice of chocolate cake, how much would you give for that cake? Right? If there's a very finite supply. The desire for that thing would be pretty high, right? But if you have 50 people in the room and say that cake represents $1, like everybody be fighting for that dollar because there's not very many of them, right? And the value of our money and what we trade is based off of the cost of labor, right? The labor that has to go into a thing to create a thing, that is what creates the value. So now you walk into the room, there's 50 people and there's 500 slices of cake. How bad is anybody going to be fighting for that cake? It's like, no, there's lots of it. Don't need it. So if you want me to do a job for you and you're going to negotiate this in the form of slices of cake, you're going to have to give me a lot of cake. That's money. Right? When it's like, you want me to do this job, but money is easy to get right now. It's everywhere. So if you want me to do this job, you're going to have to give me a lot more of that dead instrument, which is the bills. And this is what's crazy about the Inflation Reduction Act, Josh. I just pulled this up. This is the White House. Okay. This is the White House fact sheet. 1 year in, President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act is driving historic climate action and investing in America to create good paying jobs and reduce costs. Okay, here's a couple problems. Number one, it is driving historic climate action. The purpose of this was never about inflation, right? The purpose of this was to drive this whole thing about climate change. And whether you believe it's real or whether you don't, it's irrelevant, right? The point is, they put these flowery words on it to get a bill passed that negatively affects the American people. Like, I'm not against conservation. I serve on the board of the Wildlife Foundation, and we do conservation, right? So I'm not against conservation. But so number one, it really wasn't about driving inflation. And then here's the second piece that it's like the ludicrousness of these people. It's like red or blue, it is two pockets of the same pants, right? They all think the same way, and they all they want is backdoor deals. 1 year ago, on August 16, 2022, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, the largest investment in clean energy and climate action ever. Nothing about inflation.
Yeah.
The Inflation Reduction Act is a transformative law that has helped the United States meet its climate goals. Period. That's what we're trying to do, right? And strengthen energy security, investing in America to create, here's the problem, to create good paying jobs. Now, they claim right here, it says outside groups estimate the Inflation Reduction Act's clean energy and climate provisions have created more than 170,000 clean energy jobs. Now, people are like, what's the problem with that? We create jobs in America. Here's the problem. If you go back and you listen to the current Fed chair, when we were coming out of COVID, okay, and they talked about reducing inflation, here's what they said. If we're going to have a soft landing, we need, so again, this is how inflation works, whether you like it or don't. The bottom line is inflation is painful on both sides. It's painful to get into, it's painful to get out of. If one of the quickest ways to reduce inflation is to raise interest rates, right? Because you dry up the lending pool. Nobody wants to borrow money anymore. So you pull all that money back. And the second way is to eliminate jobs. So they actually said, coming out of this, if we want a soft landing, we need to pull about 2 million jobs off of the market in the U.S. economy. That means we need 2 million unemployed people that are not getting paid, because what that does, that stops the circulation of money, right? But here in the Inflation Reduction Act, the desire to decrease inflation, we added a crap ton of money into the money pool, and we created more jobs. The very two things that make inflation go up.
Yeah, and that's it, right? Like I've just learned, Zach, that in the world, when somebody tries to sell you a bill of goods with flowery language, you should usually pay attention, because it's usually exact opposite of what the end result will be, right? What people are really trying to accomplish is hidden in the words that they want to share. And at this point, right, like inflation is rampant because we continue to create money out of thin air. That's just the reality. Now, what are the ways that can change? Right? Like throughout history, what are the ways that that's actually decreased, right? And what does it take for inflation to go down? And this is the hard truth. Like I'm going to share some things now that these are things we're going to share, Zach, that people don't want to hear, right? But it's the reality. So what are the things that actually make inflation go down in the world?
So number one, you have to get this money supply out. Right? You have to take all the cake off the table. And the second thing, so like, again, you said we're going to share some more. What really needs to happen is we need a depression, right? The only way you fix this is to take the money supply out. And that means people have to not eat, right? And that is a really, really hard truth. But if you look through history, that is what's happened on every single time there has been a large influx of money printed by the government. The only way to get it out is by some big significant, we redefined what we call recession now. So we haven't been in a recession, right? But there has to be some type of thing like that. And I mean, here's how the other countries are protecting themselves. Okay, so Russia, right? We're in a war. We sanction Russia. We say, all right, Russia, no more funding, no more. What does Russia do?
They laugh and give us the bird, baby.
Don't care. We're going to go do business in a different currency. We're going to go make deals in gold. Okay? Why? Because other things like gold and silver are not subject to inflation. It is only fiat currencies, right? So, I mean, that's what the other country, what's the BRICS nations doing right now?
Yeah.
Right? They're getting rid of, they don't want to use the US currency anymore because they don't believe they're ever going to get it fixed, right? So they're all these nations are buying up gold, silver, land, oil, assets. Like
and
assets.
I just read an article. It was on Fox today by a report, and it said that President Biden had his greatest blunder in his presidency. And you want to know what that great blunder was, Zach?
Yeah, what was it? I'm curious because there's been a few. Like,
there's been a
what
few.
are they labeling as the greatest?
The greatest blunder was adding additional sanctions this week to China and Russia. And for me, right, I didn't even have to read the article. I understand the U.S. economy. I understand the world economy. And I understand that every time we add a sanction in today's world to China and Russia, all we do is drive them closer together through goods and services, of which their economies will trade and exchange with each other outside of the U.S. dollar, and their economies will become stronger, and their people will become wealthier. And the only loser in this process is the people of the United States of America. Notice I didn't say the government of the United States of America, the people. We're the loser, right? The common person who's out buying TVs and cars and Big Macs, right? We're the loser. All those things go up in price while the people in those other nations go down because we drive people away from our economy and our dollar. And boy, sometimes, just like the clip showed, we got some idiots out there trying to interpret how to make our economy better. It's a money supply issue. Everything's always has been in the world. And I love your analogy of cake. First of all, I haven't had lunch today. And now all I can think about is 500 cakes. Like, give me 500 cakes for crying out loud. I like chocolate cake. But the reality is that, right? If there's 500 cakes, there's only 50 of us. At the end of the day, cake isn't worth anything.
Nobody cares.
And we're going to get so disgusted by eating so much cake, we're going to get sick. And that's where we're at today. We're getting sick as people because those dollar bills are just flying around, right? And it's a really simple thing. You know, we can, unlike previous generations, like if we go back to the Great Depression, if we go back, I would say to the Weimar Republic in Germany after World War I, if we go back in time to the fall of the Roman Empire, when civilizations or groups of people go through this period, yes, nations, civilizations, mass of people, they're impacted the most. But there are individuals within all of those groups. There are individual families, there's individual communities who are not affected, who actually come out 1,000 times better off than their neighbors or their friends. And what is it that makes them safe? What is it that protects them? It's been the same thing, whether you go back in Germany to in between World War I and World War II, right? The Weimar Republic, or you come to the United States during the Great Depression, or if you go pick the people that came out of Venezuela in the last 3 years. What individual groups of people won and what individual groups of people were protected? And the one common denominator has always been that gold and silver or real assets, it could be land, it could be oil, but in many cases, it's been gold and silver is what made the difference for the individuals, right? The individuals that won protected themselves and used the purchasing power of gold and silver or assets of any kind, real assets. And luckily we live, Zach, in a time where we can do it. Like the common person has more power and more ability to protect themselves today than they've ever had before. But it has to be a consecrated effort. It has to be a real disciplined approach to it. Because in the very moment that it's easy for people to say today, I don't have any extra money. The bread cost too much. I don't have any extra money. It takes real discipline to, in those moments, buy the protection that saved so many people before. Would you agree?
Oh, well, 100%. And the problem is, Josh, today we live in a microwave society, right? It's instant. We want it now. And so the discipline is just not there for people to save. And in a lot of cases, right now, it's too late, right? Inflation has gotten so bad. And by the way, I think it's worthy to know. Go look up what real inflation, go look. So this is interesting. As listeners, go Google inflation rate for 2024, right? What it is versus 2022. They'll give you a number, but then I want you to go Google, and I want you to go Google what is the inflation rate of U.S. energy.
Yes. Because
the government strips out the energy cost inflation when they give their inflation numbers, because it's bad when you add energy back in. So when you look at the inflation numbers that they announce of like, oh, it's only 9% inflation, that's taking out the inflation of energy, which is your power bill and fuel, like gas, those sort of things, natural gas, how you heat everybody uses that stuff, but they pull that out because that's what gets hit the hardest. So, in fact, I'll share an interesting story with you about this. You mentioned that if you want to protect yourself, you need to do it in real assets. I agree with land, oil, all those things. The trouble with all those is the liquidity. It's like when you do need to buy something, groceries or whatever, how do you liquidate large masses of land, right? And then you have to put it back in a fiat currency that's worth nothing. Same with oil, right? So what gold and silver really does, it gives you the liquidity because it's an instrument that can be liquidated in small increments so that you can get that cash. But I was actually in Connecticut, it's probably been about 7 years ago. And I was taking an Uber, and I had another guy with me what were we doing there? I can't remember what we were doing there.
We were getting ready to invest in a large energy company in Australia.
It was before that. It wasn't that. It was with a previous CEO we had. He spoke Spanish, right? I didn't speak Spanish.
Oh, yes.
I can't remember what we were doing. Anyway, we were in an Uber, and I always ask the Uber drivers about themselves because Uber drivers have like the most interesting story of all people in the world, right? So I'm asking this guy. He doesn't speak English, so this guy is translating for me, and I'm asking where he's from. This is full-time, part-time. He said, no, this is full-time for me. I'm like, oh, interesting. Most Uber drivers aren't full-time, at least back then. Most of them were part-time, right? And I said, well, where are you from? He said, I'm from Venezuela. And I said, oh, interesting. Well, what brought you to the United States? Josh, this is what he said. This is so wild. He said, I don't know if you've watched the news, but in Venezuela, our currency has gone through hyperinflation and it's devalued so much that there are paper bills blowing down the streets and nobody's even picking them up because they're worthless. And he said, in Venezuela, I was actually a surgeon and I was very, very wealthy. And he said, it took everything I had in my bank account to get to America, and now I'm driving an Uber. And I said, well, that's terrible. What, do you still have family over there or whatever? And then he went on to tell me about some of his friends that are still in Venezuela. And here's what he said. He said, I should have listened to my friends a long time ago, his surgeon friends. He said, they had all been buying gold over the years. And he said, every one of my surgeon friends who had bought gold kept their wealth, and they're doing fine today because they didn't have to rely on the Venezuelan currency. And he said, I didn't buy any. He said, I had all of my wealth stored in the bank account with Venezuelan cash. And he said, if I'd have listened to those guys, I'd be fine, right? And so the discipline you talk about, so many people just want to buy the soda pop. They want to buy the candy bar. So as a business owner and entrepreneur, like, you have to protect yourself and you have to be disciplined in your business model to say, hey, the cash is trash. I need to buy inventory, or I need to produce a widget or whatever. But in your personal life, your business life, you have to be, in my opinion, putting this worthless cash into some type of asset that you can liquidate fairly quickly to be able to pay your bills. It's the only way to beat inflation.
Yeah, I remember you coming home from that trip. You know, we had a meeting as owners of SoundMoney the next week, and we were hot and heavy in the development of the SoundMoney wallet at that time. But we were trying to solve some other problems in the world, right? There were some problems we were trying to solve with making making it easier to buy. Nobody had ever fractionalized gold and silver at that. When we started that company, no one in the world had ever done it. Never been thought of, Zach. Right? Like on the physical side, and so we were trying to solve that issue and working through it with lawyers and bankers, and just amazing thing is you came home from sharing that experience with that gentleman, and so we really took a deep dive into, hey, could we help the average person through the Sound Money wallet solve that problem, so the next person who's in that scenario, who's experiencing inflation, could protect their assets, right? And we just went full steam ahead, right? Like we pushed so hard and so fast in the production of software and back-end services, and teaming up with the right partners around the world who could allow less than 12-hour funding of metals back into cash. And man, I look back on that now, and I think about an experience that I just had this morning. Just this morning, there was an individual who reached out that, 2 years ago, they bought at SoundMoney. They bought in the SoundMoney wallet. They bought it there because of the liquidity. They thought, they've bought things like land. You brought this up. They bought things like land to store their wealth. And they ran into a scenario where they needed to liquidate because they had a tax bill. This is what they shared with me. They had a tax bill and they needed to liquidate. The IRS was coming, getting really mad at them. And this was a significant tax bill. And then they went to sell the land, and there were no buyers in a quick enough time frame. They needed to liquidate it in 90 days, and after 90 days, all they had was lowball offers. They couldn't wait, and they couldn't wait any longer, and they had to take one of the lowball offers to pay the tax. That was previous, right? He said, but then 2 years ago, when we had an influx and we had a good year, we decided we didn't want to store our money in U.S. currency in a savings account. Thank goodness they didn't. Like, truly, thanks goodness they didn't, because the purchasing power would have been diminished now by over 40%. But they chose because of the ease and simplicity of the SoundMoney wallet. And they said, we're not going to be caught again. We're not going to stack up monster boxes of Silver Eagles, what they bought. We're not going to stack those up in our house, and we're not going to have to lug them around. And we're talking, this was enough that it would have filled the back of a pickup truck. And he was just sharing with me this morning how now in a moment of need, a medical emergency, like a real medical emergency. It's not my place to share their medical emergency, but he said he wanted to thank us. He said, in a moment last week, I was able to go liquidate those assets in a moment, in one singular second. And in less than 12 hours, it was turned back into the fiat currency that I needed to transact in, and I was able to do it. And now in my family, it's making the miracle happen. That's his words, the miracle happen. I look back, Zach, 7 years ago, had you not maybe had that experience, we wouldn't have pushed so hard for the liquidity side to be instantaneous. We wouldn't have pushed so hard 7 years ago when inflation didn't matter, but it mattered in places like Venezuela. We wouldn't have pushed so hard when we got told no, literally hundreds and hundreds of times. Every banking partner, the largest corporation, Visa and MasterCard, all these people said it can't be done. Like, you can't fractionalize gold and silver. Would have been easy to give up on that dream. And but now today, it makes all the difference for so many people. And to your point, it's just a discipline issue. Like, as human beings, the winners in this world are those that can find discipline in the simplest things in life. They're the winners over and over and over.
Yep. I agree 100%. And what's crazy is that, that story, there's hundreds of them, Josh.
Yeah.
Like
hundreds and hundreds.
There are so many people that, and maybe I'll share this, like, maybe people care, maybe they don't care. But I've had people ask me, like, what do you do with your money? Like, what are you investing in? Stocks, bonds, CDs, whatever. I don't play in the market. I think it's too highly manipulated. I think you have to be able to read the mind of Elon Musk to see what he's going to tweet tomorrow, to see whether your stock's going to go up or down, right? You got to have an inside deal from Nancy Pelosi or any other politician of who's going to be in business, who's going to be out. I just think it's too crazy, right? So I buy land, oil, and gold and silver, right?
Simple.
And had I known Had I known, so what, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we made a crap ton of money in the oil business. Had I known what I know about gold and silver today, back then, I would have put a ton of that money back into gold, right? I didn't know. So I put it in other things, right? Other businesses, which has been great, but I would be putting way more money into that, especially now with the liquidity we have in the SoundMoney wallet. It's so easy to get it back out. So easy.
I thought about this. I had a gentleman come out and see me this week. He was, he's right in the middle of doing some big things and he was looking to make a big purchase in SoundMoney. And he called me to panic, Zach, because if you didn't know, silver's been on a pretty big run the last few days. This is an inflation issue, right? If you haven't been aware, right, that we've seen like a $7 increase in silver in the last few weeks, and he was just in a sheer panic, right? He's like, he said, I missed my opportunity, like I missed it, and I shared with him. I said, you didn't miss anything, right? Like at the end of the day, we should buy gold and silver for its purchasing power and its sustainability. And I look back, Zach, how many people, when we started SoundMoney Wallet and we started 7K Metals, silver at that time was like $13.50 an ounce, right? How many people told us at that time that silver was too expensive and it was too high priced and I missed my chance?
Dude, so many. I mean, it was like, and it was crazy. How many people actually pulled the trigger because they weren't fearful on that and they bought monster boxes at $7,000 and $8,000?
Oh, endless. Like,
and what's a monster box worth today?
Yeah, $22,000, like $24,000. Like
that's not investment advice.
Right? It's not investment advice.
It's never too. In my opinion, it's never too late.
Do we think that this is how I answer that question? So my point is, right, in 2016, 17, and 18, when everybody said it's too expensive, it's $16, $17, $14, right? Is no different than it is today at $29 and $30, right? Like, there's never a bad time to purchase. The best time to purchase is always now, right? Because here's the answer and the reason. Do we really honestly believe that the government officials are going to figure this out? When the head of the economy, we just played for you, doesn't even understand how money's generated, how it's created, do we really think that they can change their fiscal and financial responsibility in such a way that inflation is actually going to reduce? Because gold and silver is anti-inflation. Where it continues to increase is because it's against inflation. It's the opposition of inflation, right? And I just say this, when people say, well, $30 is just too much to buy silver, I would just say, man, you have a lot of faith that your government officials are killing it and doing such a fabulous job. They're so freaking intelligent and they're fixing the problem so well that you shouldn't buy it. That is what you're saying. That is the reality and the truth of what you share. When you say the words, I don't know, I just don't think $30 silver is worth it. I think it's going to come down. What you're saying is, I'm sorry, in today's world, that President Biden and his fiscal team and his economists are God's gift to the world's economy. If that's what you believe, then you shouldn't buy it. If that's not what you believe, you should be buying with, and this is my point, Zach, we know that a lot of people can't buy it at $30 and they can't buy gold at $2,500 and $40. That's why SoundMoney was created, because they might be able to buy $1, $5, $10, $25 right this very second. That's what they can do.
Yeah.
And
and to your point, Josh, like this is the thing I think that's so interesting. It's like, do you have faith that they'll make the right decisions? Okay, that's one argument. Even if you have faith that they will make the right decision, with what we just explained about how money is created, it doesn't matter if they make the right decision or not. You cannot reduce the debt of the United States of America without completely dismantling the current monetary system we use. So even if they make wise decisions, yes, times may get a little bit better, but really what's happening is they're kicking the inevitable can down the road. And And we in America, we are arrogant and we are prideful, and we should be, because we kicked Britain's butt in 1776 over 2% tax, right?
That's right, over 2% tax.
And now we're paying up to 45, 50% tax. It's insane to me. Not going to go into that. But the only way that you fix this issue is you have to decouple the American economy from its current currency. And this is what most people think. This is why I brought up the arrogance thing. Most people think, oh, the U.S. is immune to the fact that our currency could devalue and go through a Zimbabwe or a Venezuela or all of these other countries that's happened. Josh, we have already lost a currency. Most people don't know this.
Yes, we do.
Abraham Lincoln, right? Back in the Revolutionary War, we used the continental, what was it called? The continental
dollar.
Yeah, it was a continental dollar, right? That was the currency.
Yeah.
It went bankrupt. So they came out with a new currency. We have already lived this. It will happen again. And so it's like, yeah, maybe the politicians make wise decisions and it's going to go up and down. But long term, the only way to fix this is to get off of this standard that we're using for the dollar and go back to something. Whether that, like right now, they're trying to create the Fed coin, which is a virtual token, right? That ought to scare the crap out of any red-blooded American.
Yeah.
Or you go back to gold and silver. And this is the way I like to think about the price of gold and silver. Gold and silver does not change in value. Gold and silver is stagnant. It is the standard by which everything is created related to labor, right? Gold and silver arrives at a price because that is how much labor it costs in whatever dollar that you're using to pay that labor. So when you see the prices of silver and gold going up and going down, it's not because gold and silver is worth more money. So if you're thinking I missed the boat and the price it's going to come way back down, what you're saying in that moment is you're saying they're going to get inflation under control and the dollar is going to become more valuable. Because when you see gold go up, what you're really seeing is your purchasing power of your dollar going down. And if you look clear back in history, the dollar has never gone like this. It's like this. So over the long term, it is a downward long-term trend. So that's why I say it's never too late. Now there's going to be dips and rises along the way, but when gold arrives at its value based off of the currency's strength, long term, they're not fixing it.
No, you're right, Zach. So hopefully today's been helpful for people that just maybe don't understand where money comes from or how inflation works, and more importantly for me, right? Here in this podcast, we really want to take everything down to the human level and the individual level, and how individuals can protect themselves or how individuals can win, whether it's in starting a new business, an entrepreneur, or whether it's in hedging inflation in your own home, right? But at the end of the day, we're here to just share ways that people can win in this world and they can be on top of it, right? And so hopefully you got some value out of that today. Hopefully understand a little bit more about it. If you want to get some other information, right? If you want to understand a little more, if you want to gain some more knowledge so you can have some more individual power, there's some really good resources out there around these topics, right? These aren't hidden truths, right? Lots of places in the world that you can go get knowledge and learn. Some great books, some great authors. We've mentioned before, G. Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Island. It might be one of the very best books ever written on just understanding money supply, the Federal Reserve, and where money comes from. Really, and written in a really simple manner, right? Not hard to understand. In a very factual manner. So you can go get one of those resources and check it out. And so, Zach, any parting thoughts today as we let the listeners go until we see them next week?
Oh, Josh, it's been fun. I think it's a great conversation. I think everybody just ought to have their heads up, right? And don't let your emotions win the day, right? Look at the facts, see what's really going on. And, I always say you can either be right or you can be rich, but you can't be both, right? So,
amen.
You got to look at it eyes wide open and detach the emotion from it, see what's really happening.
Excellent, Zach. Well, everybody keep your eyes up, keep your heads up, and till next week, when we see you next week on the Sound Money, Sound Principles of Believers podcast. Everybody have a great week. See you later.
See you, everybody.